Welcome to The Creator's Adventure, where we interview creators from around the world hearing their stories about growing a business. Appearing on podcasts is a great way to grow your brand, and today's guest is going to show you how to do it. Hey everyone, I'm Brian McAnulty, the founder of Heights Platform. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, we're here today with Mischa Zvegintzov, the founder of the Influence Army, and he is the host of the Table Rush talk show. He loves to share his insights, strategies, and tactics so that you can use your customer stories to increase your traffic, leads, sales, and conversions. He is obsession with the collecting customer stories and testimonials has given him the nickname the Testimonial Guy. Mischa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. I'm so excited, Brian.
Awesome. So my first question for you today is, what would you say is the biggest thing either that you did or you are doing that has helped you to achieve the freedom to do what you enjoy?
That, my friend, is a great question. And the biggest thing that I did, bar none, was to quit my career as a mortgage loan officer after 15, 20 years. I quit my sales career. 15 years of it was in, I was a mortgage loan officer and had a ton of success, was very good at it, very gifted at it, was great at systemizing the processes to bring new customers in and then to help them get their loans and do all those things and then turn those existing loan getters into getting their next loans with me, is what I would say, right? And I was really good at finding niches, mining data to find people that I could help, right? And then I would do telemarketing campaigns for them to get them. I would do flyer campaigns to bring those customers in. I just was really good at sifting through that data, and I paid a lot of money to be in these crazy databases where you could sort and find, all these parameters. And I loved it. And I loved serving people and helping them get their loans and doing all this. And then literally overnight, all of the things that I was gifted at in home loans became painful due to, there was some divorce in there. There was parents died in there, another failed relationship, just this existential crisis of how am I serving the world even? And so I hit this point in about 2013, maybe 13, 14, 15. The timeline is a little fuzzy, but where it became painful and I stayed in the business 2 years too long. Like I said, overnight, everything became painful. When I used to sit in sales meetings, I was the type of person that was like, hey, you're either here to help, to serve, to be energetic, to be a part of, or don't waste our time, right? And then overnight, I became the cynical one. I became the problem at the sales meeting, shall we say. And I really saw that. And I'll try and cut to the chase here, but I was like talking to the universe saying, universe, give me my next career so I can quit. Give me my next career so I can quit. And so I was praying for that and talking to the universe, talking to God, say it however you want, right? Like, how can I serve? Give me the next thing. And that next thing was not being presented. And I needed to quit to find the next thing. And so when I finally had that epiphany of like, the leap I have to make is to walk away. And I'll never forget the day I did it. I went into my boss and I was like, I'm done. I quit. And his reaction was, we'll match whatever offer you have out there. And I was like, no, you don't understand. I'm quitting the business. and he actually said to me, oh my God, I'm so jealous. I wish I could do that too. But anyway, so it was kind of a long answer, but I think quitting that painful situation to make space for the new next good was the biggest thing. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, no, that's great advice, I think, because you had me drawn in there. I was wondering, well, what's going to happen? How did he find it then? And I think you're right, though. Most often, the way way to make that happen is you have to put in some effort and sometimes do something pretty drastic in order to really make that change for yourself. So I like that.
Yeah. And I'll even follow up. What it turned out was that I had two tween boys at the time. So what the universe really wanted me to do, I had money in the bank, and so I was in a space of my money pile needs to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I was comparing myself to everybody and their imaginary money piles or whatever, and trying to do the right thing and save for retirement and all this stuff. And really, what it came down to was I was a divorced single dad, and I needed to quit my job and really focus on my boys and get them through, grade school, through high school, and prioritize that number one. Like make them their lunches, um, get them to swimming, get them to school, help them get their homework done, and literally that became my job and one of the best things that I ever did. Right, and I have my one son Waylon, who's 20 now, but at the time, um, he would literally open the door from his bedroom and like look out into the living room and see if I was there. And he'd say I was there. And he'd be like, okay, everything's good. Right. So my job was literally just to be there for those boys. But anyway,
Yeah, no, that's great. I think like it's really incredible when you can find something that you enjoy and feel purpose in doing, because then the money doesn't matter anymore almost. Like of course everybody needs some amount of money to survive, provide for their family and everything. But it's easy to like fall into these traps of like how you described, like, oh well, how's my money pile compared to his money pile or whatever. Where like I think the ideal like life and like what I try to focus on and aspire to is freedom over the money, and realizing that like the freedom is what I always wanted anyway. And that's why most people want money, is because they believe that equals freedom, but it doesn't necessarily. And so if you can get yourself to a point where like you feel that purpose and everything without like having all the money in the world yet, then like you did it, like in my mind, right? So like I feel grateful that like I'm able to wake up and realize like the thing I would be doing today is the same as what I would be doing if I had all the money in the world. So I think it's really worth like really focusing on and taking like these drastic actions like you did, if that means you can get closer to whatever that thing is for you. So you started in like old school sales and direct sales and all that, not in the online world. How do you kind of transition from that to podcast and digital marketing? And what would you say are like some fundamental skills that maybe you learned in sales that you brought into today's business?
I love that. That is such a great question. So, I was raising those two boys of mine and getting them through high school and all this fun stuff, right? In the back of my mind, and keep in mind, I'm always thinking about how can I serve? How can I serve? Like I'm literally, it's my mantra. I try and be in that mindset of, how can I serve the world? What can I bring to the table? And, being a human, being egotistical, that's a delicate balance. Sometimes I can fool myself. I can think like, yes, I'm helping, but really I'm chasing a shiny object. But anyway, sorry to go down that rabbit hole. I always knew that as soon as my kids got through high school and out of the house, like new entrepreneurial endeavors would come, right? And sure enough, my one son gets out of high school, moves out. My other son is a senior, and I'm hurtling towards the empty nest. And he's got his girlfriend, he's got his job, he's doing great at school. Like he almost needs no support from me. And I was like, all right, I can see the new entrepreneurial opportunities starting to pop up. And, I stumbled across Russell Brunson. If you know Russell Brunson, being in the online space, I'm sure you know about Russell Brunson, right? And yeah. And so in sales, I was very great at the systems. And we would have a sales funnel, right? And so where is somebody in that sales process, right? Are they a lead? Have I had contact with them? have I presented my offer? How many follow-ups have I done? Right. That systemizing that whole process. And I love that. That's one of the things that are my gifts. Right. And so I was riding on a train with someone by coincidence. I'm like, what do you do? And he goes, well, I write copy for, for sales funnels or whatever. And I'm like, a sales funnel? What are you talking about? And he goes, well, I write copy for Eckhart Tolle. And Eckhart Tolle is about to do this big launch, and this is how it works. And I was like, I was captivated, and that's how I ended. I ended up in the guy. Sorry, I got distracted. I was like, how long do I want to drag this story out? I'll try to cut to the chase. I have this habit of really telling long stories, and so I try to be cognizant of shortening them down. But I was on the train with this guy for 2 hours, and I'm just peppering him, and I'm like, I've got to learn more. And after the event was done, we were on the train back for another 2 hours, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've got him for another 2 hours. I have a captive audience. He's trapped, right? And he said, hey, yeah. He goes, this is, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years ago, whatever it is, 5 years ago by now. He goes, get russellbrunson's.com secrets. And he said, get Jeff Walker's launch. And so, of course, I got those books, and then I was immediately in Russell Brunson's funnels, and he's the master at funnels and painting that picture. And so I got sucked in. And then the things that, to directly answer your question, some of the skill sets that that I bring from old school sales into the digital online marketing space. So, and how did I get into podcasting and all that? So at the time in Russell Brunson's high-end coaching, it's called the 2CCX. I'm still in it. He's got higher levels of coaching. He's got his, inner circle, and then his, whatever, Category Kings Atlas and all that. But anyway, in the 2CCX, he's like, hey, you got to pick a platform to start getting your message out there. Pick YouTube, podcasting, or blogging. And I picked podcasting because I love all the tech, all the toys. You can see them all around. Excuse me. And so what immediately I have been able to bring is in sales, when I was doing sales, and I've done literally a million telemarketing phone calls, right? I've gone door to door. I've walked door to door. I've walked business to business. And back in the day, we used to listen to Zig Ziglar and Brian Tracy and all these kinds of salespeople. And I would literally have a cassette tape, and I would put it in an old Walkman. Anybody listening knows what a Walkman is, right? Or then it was CDs, and I would walk to work and I would have these tapes. And what they would tell you was smile when you're talking on the phone, smile, right? And so I used to have a smile stick, like a smile selfie stick back in the late 90s. So it would remind me to smile. So whenever I get on the phone, whenever I get on a podcast with someone like you, whenever I go to a networking event, I smile habitually. Right. And that makes us more inviting. It makes us more, the synapses, like there's all these studies out there. So I naturally, when people meet me or see me on the podcast, they go, oh my God, you have amazing energy. I'm like, yeah, I habitually smile. I roll my shoulders back, right? Sit up straight. So these are all things in sales, like sit up straight, smile, roll your shoulders back. And then, I talked a little bit about prayer, talking to God, the universe, call it what you will, about being and about how I can be of service. So whenever I'm about to jump on a podcast or create something, I'm like, all right, God or universe, how can I be of service? What can I bring to the table? Right. And when you're doing telemarketing sales, initially it can be a grind and it can be heavy. And so you really have to figure out, like, I'm here to serve. And so every no is an opportunity for me to find that person to serve. Does that make sense to get to the yes?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I can relate to that, even having never done like the telemarketing kind of thing. is like even just in like the content that I'm creating. First of all, the smiling thing I think is important. And for me, I think that's something like I really have to like consciously work towards. Some people are more naturally maybe better at that than others, but I think it's important to like to practice that if you're not. So I remember in like elementary school, my teachers would say like, "Oh, Brian, you have like the best poker face. No one has any idea what you're thinking." And like I do feel that is a little bit true of naturally just like not really revealing as much in my expression, which I should because I agree like what you're saying, like it helps the energy of the whole thing and people feel more comfortable to talk around you and everything. And even on a phone call when they don't see it, it comes through. And so that's the one point. But then the second point about like remembering to serve and everything, like I didn't have this natural feeling that like I want to be popular on social media. I want people to know who I am. Like I actually rather not and just do my thing. But I realized like the reason that I'm doing something like this podcast and like you just interviewed me on your podcast was that I care more about getting my message out there to help people and make that impact on people that I know I can provide that value than I do of like not caring to be popular on social media. And so realizing that that's the reason and focusing in on that.
Yeah, I love that. So good. It's interesting. I was on a podcast interview, the Ecom X Factor, and they're all about ecom products, and he literally said to me, "Well, what about us introverts?" Right? Because he's like, "You're so outgoing," and I'm like,
Mm,
"Well, that's a great question." And I think the thing to remember in all this is not to try to be somebody who we're not. Right? It's like we're just trying to bring forth the best version of who we are in that moment, right? So if you're an introvert and you'd like to hide out in a hoodie, show up on the podcast in your hoodie, but just smile. You know what I mean? It's like you don't need to be anybody you're not. And I think what happens is as we embrace who we are more, um, those people who who resonate with us will gravitate towards us, right? And that's one of the great things about the internet right now. And I sound naive saying this, but it's like, hey, we have access to 8 billion people. So be you, someone's going to find you, right?
yeah.
Yeah. But I would also say, I want to tell a quick story, unless you had another question, because I have a cool
Sure. No,
story.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when I was a kid, I was painfully shy. And like, if I had to get up in front of class to speak, I would cry. I couldn't do it. And I even had a teacher one time, God bless him, but they were like, Misha, come up and answer the question. And they're like, oh, you're probably going to cry and blah, blah, blah. And just humiliated me, right? And sure enough, I got up there and I cried. And it just, that moment is seared in my head. It's probably one of the reasons that I was like, I'm going to be in sales and do great. But I think with practice and diligence and practicing these tricks of smiling and doing these things we talk about, we can be outgoing in our own way. Does that make sense, kind of?
Yeah, I think it's true. And I relate to that as well. I'm an introvert. I was always shy and stuff in school. And the kind of analogy I like to compare it with, I would say, is I realized for myself the one thing that I didn't feel nervous with was I was in a band in high school and I have no problem playing guitar in front of hundreds of people. I didn't feel nervous really about that. But like to give a speech in front of the class or something like that, yeah, totally nervous about that. And I realized it's because like when I'm performing and like playing the guitar, like I'm just doing my thing. Like that's the thing that I enjoy. I'm just doing it. I'm not thinking or caring about what people think of me in that moment. And I think that's kind of the way that it is. Like if you can practice going through and the telemarketing or talking in front of people, whatever it is, you can get to the point that you're so comfortable with it that you just feel like, oh, I'm just being me. I'm just doing my thing rather than feeling the potential judgment or uncertainty and kind of having like that shyness take over.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great way to frame it. I'll give anybody else listening a little tip too that I learned from McCall Jones. If you know who McCall Jones is, but she's got this program, or she calls it charisma hacking. But she says, hey, whenever you're going to go on a podcast or you're going to go speak in public or do any of these things, she says, find that seven moment, that seven excitement level moment um, in your life, and then talk it through before you jump on the podcast, before you go on stage. And so,
Mm.
like, a seven moment might be that, hey, I'm sending out a new round of invites to go speak on podcasts. I send one to Brian McNulty, and he says yes, right? And I'm like, yeah, my new pitch worked. Right, like that's a seven moment. And so if I'm nervous before I'm going to jump on another show, I can be like, I can literally say, oh my gosh, I was building up this script and how I want to serve, and I was going to start sending out emails, and I was so nervous, and I came up with this new email, and then I sent it out, and I sent it to Brian, and oh my god, he said yes. Right, like show up with that kind of energy versus like the overhypey energy, like the
Mm.
10. And so I love that idea, and I think that was a great tip that I heard. So I just
Yeah, I like
wanted
that.
to share that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those listening who are entrepreneurs and they've heard like, okay, well, podcasting can be a way of promoting my business. And specifically, like, let's say whether you have a podcast or not, like being a guest on other people's podcasts, I think this is something that either people maybe underestimate how powerful it can be to do that, or even if they know, they don't know how to get started with that. So I want to talk about that a little bit because I was just on your show right now. I'm going to be on another podcast later today, but I'm kind of new to this myself. And I found that like, yeah, I have this company. We've got thousands of customers. We've been around for a while, but I haven't really been on podcasts. I haven't really done that kind of thing. So people don't know about me. And so I'm still kind of starting from scratch in a way, even though like I'm an established business. And so I think it takes effort, even if you've been doing this for a while, just to kind of get started. So I guess what would you tell somebody who is maybe in a position like myself where maybe they've done a few podcasts already, or maybe they're brand new to this and they want to figure out like, well, how can I be a guest on somebody's podcast if nobody really knows who I am yet?
Yeah. It's such a great, great, great question. Um, I think we all have stories to tell, right? And I think when you interviewed me, we talked a little bit about, or when I interviewed you, you referenced imposter syndrome, right? And with what you do and with your Heights platform and the people that you help, create their courses, their membership, all that, really what the holdup is putting yourself out there, the launch of the idea, putting it out there, right? We're trying to get it shiny enough. We're trying to get it, perfect. And we want to market it the perfect way. And we want to know all this before we go to market, right? And I think it's a little bit the same with going on a podcast tour, shall we say, right? Um, so it's one thing you can do. Let's see, where do I want to go with this? So I'm a systems guy, right? And so I like to systemize everything and make it easy, right? So you could decide right now, I'm going to go on a podcast tour and I don't know what I'm going to say yet. Well, great. You probably have an idea of the audience you want to speak to. So you could start building that list of podcasts that you want to speak on, right? You can start doing that sort of fundamental work, right? At the same time as you start building out that list of podcasts that you want to speak on, the next thing you could do is go, okay, I know I've got stories to tell. So people are like, what do I say? When do I say it? What am I going to talk about? Right? I think that's another concern that we have when we're going to go on podcasts, right? So I have got what's called my my story bank, my story bank framework. I can't remember the name of it, what it is right now, which is incredible pressure. But basically, it's start collecting your stories that you can pull from when you're asked questions, right? So I have 4 story arcs to my life. There's the recovery lens. So I got clean and sober at a super young age, 17, and I've been sober my whole life. And I have that lens to pull from, right? And I have stories like my speaking of being of service comes from that recovery lens, right? Like part of getting sober and clean is you got to shift your mindset out of being selfish to serve, right? For example. Then I've got my sort of the success years, right? My mortgage success years. I was making a ton of money. I was married, grew my kids, like all this sort of stuff, right? Like I've got all these great stories to tell, my Zig Ziglar experiences, all this stuff. And I've got my sort of failure, flame out, existential divorce crash. And now my other story arc is my, the digital marketing influence army where I am, right? So you figure out what those 4 key story arcs in your life, and then you start inventorying the stories within them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah,
Is
definitely.
this useful?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And so then within those stories, we're looking for those, our own stories, our customer success stories, right? And then our sort of mentor inspirational moment stories. And so we're looking for those 3 things. And what I tell my students is don't prejudge those stories, just write them down. Doesn't mean you have to use them, just start listing out your stories, right? So you get your 3 or 4 or 5 story arcs of your life. And within each of those story arcs, what are your personal stories? What are your customer stories, if any? Or it could be, mom stories, cousin stories, any success point stories, right? And then those inspirational mentor stories, or like you're walking down the street and you meet somebody and they say something to you and it changes the course of your life, right?
Yeah.
And then all
Yeah,
we need to do
well,
is
I want to kind of interject here quick just to say
yeah,
that I think this is important because even after you get on like the show, like they booked you and they said like, okay, we're going to have it. It's still important to know all that. And you might think to yourself, I know what my life is. Like, what do you mean? Why do I have to write this kind of thing down? But there, like from my limited experience being on a few podcasts here and there, I've noticed that like it's really important to really get honed in on those stories that you have that you want to tell because the person interviewing you, they might be a great interviewer, but still like they don't know the right way to ask the question necessarily to get that story out of you. And so you don't want to also have to rely on the person you're talking to or person interviewing you being the best interviewer in the world to have done the most research and know everything and happen to get the exact right wording to get that answer out of you. You want to have that story kind of in your mind already that they're able to ask that question and you can make the connection and say, this is the thing that I'm going to talk about here. Here's this story because this is what it all connects to. And you can speak a lot more clearly and provide some engaging value that way.
absolutely. And subconsciously, I believe, and I'm sure there's studies on it, but I've just found it to be true. Subconsciously, our mind has that inventory of stories and is looking for chances to pull them out and naturally gives us the opportunity. We find the segue for the interviewer, right? It's
Hmm.
like, oh, this story is probably,
Exactly.
and it
Yeah.
just comes up, right? And yeah, and I even think, and when I'm listing those stories, I just write down a word or a phrase. Like you don't have to pencil out the whole thing. You can, but it's just like good to remember key moments, right? And what's the phrase or the word that can spark that memory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think probably everyone here has realized like someone that they've watched on a podcast or a show or something be interviewed. And there's times when like either they themselves, their team, their PR agent, whatever, kind of told them to like, hey, this is what we want to talk about, and they try to like turn it into that, right? And so sometimes maybe that could be a bad thing if they're just trying to talk about their agenda and they don't want to like go with the flow of everything. But at the same time, it's that like they have this inventory in their mind and in their head of ready to go of how can they relate these different pieces to the message they want to share with the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, the practice comes in, and I spoke to it earlier, and I need work on it, is like, how do I shorten or lengthen the story, right? We've got our 30-second version, our 3-minute version, and our
Yeah.
5-minute
No, well,
version.
I completely agree. I have to work on that as well because yeah, you start telling it and then you're like, oh, I remember my whole life now. And then you want to tell about all of it, right? But so like it's funny to think about that. It does really take practice to tell your own story in the most engaging and like concise way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I speak a lot with my hands, right? And
Mm.
and and if you watch me whenever I speak a lot with my hands, and where am I going with this? I just remembered, like, be you, right? Like, we want to be ourselves. If you speak a lot with your hands, use your hands, and don't let other people um, dissuade you from being who you are, right? So some people will say, Misha, you use your hands too much when you speak, right? Like I'm doing it right now. And now everyone might be paying attention to that, which is amazing. But people are drawn to that too. So the reason I'm telling you that story is because I can tend to draw on with my stories, but people have given me feedback and said, I love when you just go on with your story. That's what I love about you. Right. And so, again, as we spoke to earlier, it's finding that person that resonates with us. Right. And we don't need to be all things to all people. So, anyone listening or watching, like, don't freak out if you think your stories are too long. It's okay.
Yeah,
That
definitely. And
was
I
my
mean,
point there.
just the effort moving forward and practicing at it, you'll get better. But yeah, I think that's important to note too. Like you don't have to be this perfect version of what everybody maybe says. You're allowed to certain imperfections about yourself or what people consider to be imperfections are actually like that's what makes you you.
Yeah.
Okay, so how about like now like we get what we should do to prepare. How do we actually reach out to like a podcast to get them to accept us? Because I know in this situation, actually, you reached out to us. We don't accept that many requests from guests. We usually just go and say like, "Hey, do you want to be on the show?" And we kind of like have it set. So you convinced us. I'm curious if you can share a little bit of like your template or framework of how somebody can use that to approach podcasts to be on there.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I do have a framework for it. I teach it. I'm like, here's the outline for your what I call my pod pitch guesting guest speaking request template. I think is what I call it. But I can tell you this: a lot of it is based on authenticity and a little bit of pre work. Um, so uh, I called out an audience, if you notice in that script. So we want to call out our audience. How do we serve? And then also some authenticity, right? And I should actually pull up the framework, and I could tell you more to it. But I'm a cut to the chase kind of a guy, right? And I want there to be as little fluff as possible, and I want to authentically tell you why I'm here and what I want to do and how we can serve each other. And and the script was designed to cut through all the the BS of having to follow you on Facebook, to having to build a relationship with you on social media and send you gifts and all these things that so many people tell us to do. They're like, go follow them on Facebook and comment on their content and do all this and do all that, right? Which is great if that's authentic to you, right? And I'm not saying any of that's bad, but what I am saying is that if we're going to go on podcasts at scale, right? Which is what you want to do, which is what I want to do. We want to get our messages out there at scale. Like, we don't have time. I don't have time. I have a small team. We don't have time to befriend everybody on Facebook first.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it makes sense. I remember, so my assistant saw your message and she thought, hey, this is probably pretty good. And then she showed it to me. And I remember like there wasn't any fluff like what you're saying. Like it got to the point, there's no like, here's who I am, here's a whole like paragraph all about me. It was speaking directly to like, this is how I can provide value to your audience and like all that kind of thing. Like I got it right away. I didn't feel like, oh, what is all this information that I have to go through to make a decision or not? It was really clear on like the proposition you were making.
yeah, perfect. Thank you. And thank you for that feedback, right? Because that's what I was trying to do. And it's up to us as the person wanting to go on the shows to go, okay, like I looked at your audience and I'm like, I literally believe I can help your audience, right? So I know that. So I'm like, great, this is authentic. Like I can help your audience, right? And the other thing about it is I can talk about podcasting, guesting, telling stories, telling our customer stories, getting testimonials, all this kind of stuff all day. I love it. I do it for free, right? So that's the space I'm coming from too. So I'm like, hey, how can I serve? Here's the value proposition. And then here is a little give. Like I did take some time to look at your podcast. I did take some time, right? Because at the end I was like, hey, by the way, I love your podcast. I love that interview you did. I think it was a lady, I can't remember her name, but she was
Crystal, I think
she
you
was
were
just
talking about.
what's
Yeah.
that?
Crystal Bonnet, I think you were mentioning her
Yeah.
interview. Yeah.
I just loved how she was authentic and talking about her current challenges. And I was like, yeah, like that was great, right? That inspired me to hang in there through the entrepreneurial challenge, right? Through that journey. And so, yeah, it's like, let's cut to the chase. You've got an audience. I can serve your audience. Um, and yeah, I did at least take a minute to know that, yeah, you've got a show and I listened and I can serve your audience. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think it's also, I guess for anybody listening to this from the perspective of someone who has a podcast and like would receive an email like that, I guess now like thinking through this myself, like how would I approach it? What I can realize is like the kind of people we would reject right away are those where like it's something really generic and they say like, oh, this person should be on your podcast, blah, 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 blah. And it's just this pitch where like we have to think too hard to even decide like, are they a fit? Like, and we have to try to like process that. And oftentimes it's just maybe they even would be, but it's just too much work. And we say, no, we're just going to deal with the guests that we have. And so without like being so like you don't want to be so generic and just blasting everyone like trying to be on everyone's podcast. But at the same time, like the point you're making is you also don't have to spend like all this time like engaging and building a relationship with the person directly. So much so that you don't have time to actually reach out to enough podcasts. And so yeah, so you found this balance where you're making it clear that you understand what they're doing. You're making it clear what you do and what you can offer the audience. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you know who Johnny Lee Dumas is, I'm assuming.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Entrepreneurs on Fire. That podcast, he's very well known for that podcast. Has I don't know however many hundreds of thousands of downloads a month or whatever it is. But I had an opportunity to see him um, speak at Funnel Hacking Live a few years ago, and he basically said, um, like podcasters are busy. You're busy. Brian is a busy guy, right? And they don't have time to come up with the ideas, or not that we don't want to, or it's just, you said it great. Like, you're busy. If I can frame the idea for you, and that's in that email, what it does as well. It's like, hey, here's what we could literally call the podcast episode. And here's some points you can speak to, right? Solves a whole bunch of problems. And I'm here to serve. So just to button that up a little bit. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, one of the things we like to do on this show is I like to have every guest ask a question to the audience. If you could think of anything to ask our audience, whether it's something you're curious about, something you kind of want to get everybody thinking about, what would that be?
Yeah, I love that. I have to cough. I'm on the tail end of a cold or allergies or something. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Thank goodness for a production team, right? So yes, I did write down a question, and excuse me. And so I know that your audience are creators, right? That are creating courses, that are learning how they're at some part of this journey of this arc of I'm an expert. I've got a message to bring to market that I can help people these learnings. So how am I going to do it? So they're like, oh, let's get on Height's platform and build a course, right? To perhaps they're at the other end of it, like the lady who you mentioned, Barbara, I think her name was, who's like built a business, right? And now she's figuring out how to scale it to 7 or 8 or 9 figures or whatever it is, right? So my question to you, that person is, as a creator, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to driving traffic to your content, to your courses? And maybe a better way to say it is, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to getting your eyeballs on your content? Or even better, what's your biggest challenge when you're putting yourself out there?
Awesome. Yeah, good thing to think about. All right, Misha. Well, before we get going, where else can people find you online?
Awesome. Go to guestingguide.com, and I have this great podcast tour guesting guide that answers the top 10 questions on on going on a guest speaking tour. It's got tips in there on how to find podcasts, more podcasts than you know what to do with to speak on, how to get emails, how to write that pitch, that email pitch, everything. So guestingguide.com, click on it for free, and it'll get you started on the right path.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much, Misha.
Thank you, Brian.